guest speaker today is Eliot Kleinberg, and all of these books were written by him. My favorite so far is Weird Florida, and now I see you have Weird Florida too. So it's very, very interesting. He's the creator of the Weird Florida books. He's a Floridian, a native, born in South Florida. He spent 4 decades as a reporter, including more than 33 years at the Palm Beach Post in West Palm Beach. And I thank you for coming to Hollywood for us. In addition, he has books covering local news and also wrote in the Post West Palm Beach, all about Florida and Florida's history. Today he's going to talk to us about hurricane season because it's coming up. Eliot?
Hello, everybody.
Hi.
When I was growing up down in southern Dade County, I know it's Miami-Dade County, but we'll still call it Dade County. I was in a youth group, and they had a chapter in Hollywood. And every once in a while, we would come up here for like a thing where we would like sleep over at people's houses and stuff. And for a 16-year-old to get in a car and drive 1 hour to another county, what kind of a rush. Hollywood was like Las Vegas. We get to drive all the way to Hollywood. Later, as a reporter, I had the good fortune to, I had to call on the Hollywood Historical Society for some stories and research and documents, and I don't have to tell you that they had everything I needed, that they were helpful. I have dealt with historical societies and libraries, large and small, from the library in Okeechobee City to the National Archives, the New York Public Library, Broward County Libraries, Palm Beach, and they've always been incredibly helpful, not only to me as a researcher, but they are, for our society, they are holy ground.
Yes.
And please support your libraries, because they're the only ones you have.
Yes.
So, having said that, I'm also going to ask you to support the Florida Humanities Council, because they sponsored this event, and they have the Speakers Bureau of about 30 people, and who can speak on various topics. I have 3 topics that I can speak on. One of them is hurricanes. And so what happens is a group like the Historical Society reaches out to the Florida Humanities Council and says, oh, I like this guy, I want him to come and talk about hurricanes. And then the Humanities Council gives me a check, and the Historical Society doesn't have to. All they got to do is help me with my mileage, which the good news is it's not that far from Boca Raton, and sometimes a hotel, which obviously I didn't need today, and then they get a speaker. So, I don't have to tell you what has happened to the Florida Humanities Council, which is that they no longer get money from the National Endowment for the Humanities, as of about a month ago. So, if you want to continue to get speakers for your groups, we're told that as of right now, this thing's going to keep going. So if you're in a group and you want to get a speaker, please consider supporting the Humanities Council to cover the money they're not getting anymore. So those are all my rants. Let's talk about hurricanes. Who here lived through Andrew? Okay, people who don't live here will tell you, oh, you were up in Hollywood. Andrew was way down there. You didn't get anything from Andrew. Who here got something from Andrew? Yes, indeed. It bent my fence in Boca. It also smashed the homes of many of my relatives in South Dade, where I grew up. At one point, the paper said, of course, we went down to, even though we don't cover Miami, you cover Andrew. At one point, I was in my old neighborhood, and there were people standing in line at the insurance office, and the guy yelled out, "Hey, Eliot, and it was one of my high school classmates. And and of course my dad's house was severely damaged. My brother's house was totaled. So it becomes very personal in a hurry. And so we all know about hurricanes. And yet, there are people who move here. And when you move here from another place, when you move into a new neighborhood, they give you the charter of the homeowner association, and they tell you all the rules, what you can't do. You can't paint, you can't do this, can't do that, right? And then maybe you get a note from your town saying, you pay taxes for this, and we clean up the swale, da da da. What they don't give newcomers, because they don't think they have to, is that we get hurricanes. And so every once in a while people are amazed. I moved down here from Chicago, and you guys get hurricanes. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. But here's the cool thing about hurricanes. You can prepare for them. I have a son living near Oakland, California right now. You know how much warning he gets for an earthquake? 0. The first time he was out there, they had a very minor one. And I called him up, and the second thing he said was, "What earthquake?" First thing he said is, "Why'd you wake me up?" So, hurricanes can be no big deal, or they can be very, 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 very bad. I worked for the Palm Beach Post, and early on I learned about a particular hurricane, and I was stunned at how little had been reported about this hurricane. Having grown up in South Florida, even though I was up in Palm Beach County now, I thought I knew everything about Florida and Florida history and hurricanes, which of course I didn't. So when it came time for the 75th anniversary of this hurricane, I decided that it was the most underreported natural disaster in American history, and it needed a book. So, you probably hate when people read from their book. Don't you hate that? Well, I'm going to do it. The bracelet caught Festus Stalling's eye. It was on another of the corpses, all of them bloated and discolored from days in standing water and merciless sun that stole their identities and reduced them to lost debris. Stallings reached and closed his hand around the bauble. It was on the arm of a little girl. A month earlier, she had proudly shown him the bracelet, a gift for her 2nd birthday. He grabbed her by that arm, lifted her up, and added her to the pile of death. The fire whooshed. The workers stepped back, staggered by the burst of heat and the smell of gasoline and burning flesh. A thick, oily cloud of smoke rose. It rose above the muck, above the bent sugarcane and tattered vegetable stalks, above the scattered sticks that once had been home, above the Great Lake, into the Florida sky. It was a black cloud. So that's what I named my book, was Black Cloud. I named it Black Cloud for a lot of reasons. One was because the black cloud, an omen of an approaching storm, the black clouds of the storm itself, the horrific way that black people were treated before, during, and after the storm, and unfortunately this, which was funeral pyres, because the ground was so saturated that they couldn't bury the people, and so they piled them up in bodies and set them on fire. Mr. Stallings gave me that story. He's gone now. I was calling him about something else, and somehow the conversation got to the hurricane. He told me that story, and I knew that had to be the beginning of my book, because hurricanes are machines with weather, but they are human events. And so I'm going to talk to you not only about this storm, but about all the storms, why they affect Florida history, why they affect you, and what you can do to protect yourself from the hurricane. So, this is the book, Black Cloud. It came out in 2003, 75th anniversary. It got reprinted, and people still want me to talk about it, which is kind of interesting. Should I be scared? The thing I especially like about this is that whoever has or has had a dog, and what do they do during a thunderstorm?
They
Right?
go nuts.
And fireworks too. Thank goodness a lot of places are going away from fireworks to drones and stuff, because it terrifies the animals. So, should you be scared of a hurricane? Well, let's talk about it. Here is the forecast. You know the guys out in Colorado Can anybody, I still don't have an explanation about why people in Colorado are giving forecasts for hurricanes instead of like the snow report. But here was the 2024 season. Obviously, the 2025 season hasn't started yet. And here's what they predicted. They predicted a lot, right? 23 named storms. In other words, at least tropical storm or higher. A 60% above average. Okay? They actually got 18, so they were a little low on the forecast. They forecast 12 would become hurricanes. They were a little off on that by 1. And major hurricanes, that's category 3 or higher. That is sustained winds of 154 miles an hour. So, next time you are on the interstate, roll down your window and stick your head out. That is 65 miles an hour. This is 154 sustained, and that's category 3. I'm sorry, that's category 5. Category 3 is 115. So that's, you don't want to stick your head in that. So, those are the monsters. So they predicted 6, there were 5. Okay. A little off. Here's the guy, William Gray. He's gone now, but a fascinating guy who he would explain how he used all these algorithms and weather patterns and stuff to make his forecast. And he did pretty good. He was pretty far on. So here was the 23 forecast. This is interesting. They named 18, they got 20. 4th highest on record, named storms. 3 majors. 2023, here's the map. Oh my gosh, look at all those hurricanes.
Wow.
Right? A lot of hurricanes. I'm about to make a point. Number of storms striking Florida? 1. So, people in Florida will say, 2023, oh, that was a quiet season. You with me? Because, now, did the people in Tallahassee think it was a quiet season? No. Okay.
I'm here at Bobby Beach, and it's still
I think that's in Australia. I don't think it has anything to do with hurricanes. I loved it because I always made fun of the TV reporters standing out there. One time during one of the approaching hurricanes, I was in the hurricane center with Max Mayfield. Who remembers him? Yeah. And we were watching TV, and one of the Miami stations was doing, and I said, Max, one day one of these people is going to be decapitated on live TV, and that'll be the end of it. He said, it won't be the end of it. So, every year you hear this around May, right?
Yeah.
It's going to be an active hurricane season. I separately do a blog on grammar and bad writing. What constitutes an active season? What would constitute a not active season? 0 hurricanes? Let me tell you a little secret. We've never had a season with 0 hurricanes. So how many of the last 100 seasons, how many of them were active? Yes. So next time some TV guy says we're going to have an active season, sit on your couch and laugh at the guy, okay? And then we end up with this. People write? I used to fight with my editors all the time because they wanted to put the guy's forecast on the front page. And I said, listen, I took statistics at the University of Florida. It was one of the few classes, non-writing classes I took, and I did okay. And my point was that if they say there's going to be 15 hurricanes and there's 16, does that change how you prepare for hurricanes? No. If the average is 15 and they say there's going to be 14, does that change anything?
No.
So, except for the fact that it reminds people to get ready for hurricane season, which I completely support, what is the real value of these things? Not that much. So, here's the other thing. I always would put in my story, and again, I'm fighting with the TV people who are putting this run for your lives. I would always put in my story very high up, the forecast team never says where or whether a hurricane will hit. Because if it doesn't hit you, right? I mean, we're all selfish, right? So, what are the odds of a hurricane actually hitting your house? Well, let's take a look. There's the hurricane coastline. 3,700 miles. Okay? Any of you guys go to Vegas? You're in pretty good shape, right? Let's look at the 2024 forecast, right? There's the hurricanes. 2024. Hurricanes, 11. Majors, 5. hurricane striking South Florida? 0. That was a tropical storm. Oh, just the one. Well, it was a tropical storm when it came up there. It became a hurricane at the end. Okay. 2020 hurricane, right? This season was so busy, they ran out of names. 30 name storms. Right? They had to use the alpha. They had to go to the Greek alphabet. Right? 14 hurricanes. 7 majors. How many hit Florida? 0. 0 hit Florida as a hurricane. So while people were writing their PhDs on this incredibly active hurricane seasons, what were your neighbors saying? Golly, it's been a quiet season. Let's look at 1992. Oh my God, now that's a quiet season. Man, hardly anything was going on in 1992. You only had 6 named storms. You only had 4 hurricanes the whole season. And they only had 1 major. Now that is a quiet hurricane season. Thank goodness we had a nice, quiet hurricane season in 1992. Who remembers the nice, quiet hurricane season of 1992? Florida landfalls, how many do we have? Just 1. Just 1. And that was it. So, what I'm trying to get to here is, forget the numbers. They're a wonderful discussion. They're great luck for the water cooler. If they encourage people to go out and do stuff that maybe they've forgotten, then they're fine. But the reality is, will a hurricane hit me? Yes. No. Prepare for both. Right? Prepare for both. You wear seatbelts?
Yeah.
Yes, you do. You expect to get in a wreck?
No, so.
But you wear them anyhow, right? So, let's talk about hurricanes in Florida. You cannot discuss, I've written all these history books. I did a history column that ran in the paper, ran in 22 papers in Florida. You cannot talk about the history of Florida without talking about hurricanes, period. Every major event, just about all of them, there's been a hurricane connected. Anybody gone up to Jonathan Dickinson State Park? It's just north of Jupiter in Martin County. It was in the news recently, you might have heard. They want to put a golf course there, right?
Yes.
Yeah, they wanted to put one in, what's the one just across the line in Dade County that they wanted to put a golf course there, right? They want to put golf courses in about, yeah, they want to put golf courses in about 10 state parks. Well, as soon as they found out about Jonathan, they're not putting a golf course at Jonathan Dickinson. But it was an opportunity for me to remind people who was Jonathan Dickinson. Most people don't know. He was a Quaker merchant who was on his way from Jamaica. He had a plantation in Jamaica. He decided to shut it down and moved back to Philadelphia. And his ship wrecked right around where the state park is now in 1696. So no Coast Guard. And he and his family and colleagues had to walk from what's now southern Martin County to St. Augustine, which was the only place where there was Europeans. And from there they were able to get a boat to Charleston and then Philly. So when he got to Philly, he wrote a book about his ordeal. Now, his Quaker publishers wanted to accentuate the fact that God had rescued him, but what we had, a side value of this thing is it gave people an incredible snapshot of the indigenous peoples of Florida, all of whom are gone. They're gone. The Seminoles are not native to Florida. They didn't show up until the 1700s. There were 500,000 indigenous peoples in Florida when the Europeans arrived in the early 1500s, and they're all extinct. You recognize their names: the Appalachian, the Jaga, the Timucuan, the Tequesta, the Tocobaga, all gone. So his book was an incredible snapshot. That one of the few snapshots we were able to get. So, but it was because he was in a hurricane. Mel Fisher, you guys remember him, the shipwreck?
Yeah.
He made a lot of money, lost one of his sons. One of his sons drowned trying to get it, but it's a big deal. He took to sink in 1622. Anybody know why that area is called the Treasure Coast? Did you ever wonder? Well, there was a fleet called the 1715 fleet. They called it the Plate Fleet. Now, who here speaks Spanish? They did not call it the Plate Fleet. because it was full of plates. What was it full of? Plata. What does plata mean? Silver. So it was loaded with silver that they had looted from the indigenous peoples of Central America, because they'd already wiped out the indigenous people in Florida, and now they were working on the indigenous people in Central and South America, and they were on their way to the port of Cadiz in Spain, which was the major port for people bringing loot over from the New World, and they hit a hurricane. And all of these ships, look at that, boom, 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 right in a row, and they all dropped. And they dropped in relatively shallow water, and the Spanish actually were able to salvage most of the loot, but the ships were salvaging, so they left them there, and so it became called the treasure cruise. Sank in, hurricane. Now, there's a town up in the Panhandle called St. Joseph, Florida. Don't bother looking for it; it's not there anymore. It's near Port St. Joe. If any of you are familiar with that area, there's Apalachicola. Okay, I guess it's about halfway from Tallahassee to Pensacola. It was where Florida's Constitution was written, believe it or not. For a while, it was the biggest town in Florida. There's a town there now called Port St. Joe right next to it. You might have heard of that. But St. Joseph's was wiped out by a yellow fever epidemic. And 2 hurricanes. I've written a lot about the history of Palm Beach County, and of course Palm Beach County started on the island of what's now Palm Beach. We're talking like there were people there in the 1870s, and some lady in the 20s wrote a memoir of coming there as a small child, like in 1890 something, and it was incredibly valuable. And she said that her family had been brought down from Ohio because they had been told that they had gentle zephyrs. Okay, it's cut off at the bottom. That Florida had gentle zephyrs, like breezes, and then they got one that wasn't gentle. And that's when they learned that you got to watch out for these things. So, anybody here University of Miami fan? Oh, there I see in the back. Okay, I'm a Gator, but I also like the University of Miami. Does anybody know why they're called the Hurricanes? You guys are having an event in November, aren't you? They're called. I'm sorry, in 2026. They're called the Hurricanes because they were supposed to open on September 18th, 1926. Does anybody know why they didn't? Yes, indeed. This was a bad one. This was very, very bad. At its top, when it hit, it was pretty much the worst hurricane ever to hit America, except for the great 1900 Galveston hurricane.
What year was that, you said?
1926. September 18th, 1926. But it was more than just a hurricane event, because Miami's real estate crash was already, the bubble was already bursting and they were on their way down. And so this was kind of the last nail in the coffin. In addition, all the northern newspapers and banks had been watching all their money come down to Florida during the real estate boom. And they had been looking for any reason to tell people, don't go down there, don't invest your money. And then when they started finding out that some of the stuff they had bought was underwater, but then they got this, and they wept for joy. Because they said, see, you don't want to go there, they get hurricanes, really bad ones. Well, this was a bad one. This was the Miami Daily News. My dad worked for the Miami News for 40 years. He was there the day it closed down, the afternoon paper in Miami. He just died about a year ago, and between us, we were in the newspaper business in South Florida for 72 years, for which I'm very proud. When I talk about my dad and me, it's like when Hank Aaron's brother Tommy, who's had 1 home run, and he would say, between us we have 716 home runs. That's what I had with my dad. People say, well, wasn't your dad also a writer? And I say, no, I was also a writer. So he worked for the Miami Daily News. He wasn't there when the hurricane hit. He got there in 1949. But this was the view outside the building. There was a boat that rolled over in the port of Miami. They couldn't get anything in or out. So it was a disaster. And everybody, the trains gave free tickets to anybody who wanted to leave town, and a lot of people did. But here's the thing about the 26 hurricane that you need to know. Because people think that hurricanes hit the coast and fall apart like a vase. Anybody who has friends in North Carolina can tell you that that is not the case. Right? This hurricane, after it smashed Miami. By the way, if the 1926 hurricane, I'm sorry, if Andrew, instead of making its landfall down in Homestead, had followed the path of the 26 hurricane pretty much into downtown Miami, it would have done 3 to 4 times the damage. Everybody remember how much the damage was? Yeah, times 3. And by the way, if it had made that path, guess what had happened to you guys? Would have been a lot worse than it was. So, the hurricane smashed Miami, destroyed the real estate boom, and then it kept going. And it went up to this little town called Moore Haven. I learned a lot about the lake region when I worked at the Palm Beach Post. It's actually a fascinating part of Florida with a great history. There's this little town of Moore Haven. And you see where it is. And the hurricane came up here. And it drowned 600 people. Why? Well, I'm about to tell you.
Why, Cape Kennedy has anything to do with it?
Let me back up. So the reason it killed all those people is because for hundreds of years, for millions of years, the shore of Lake Okeechobee was just the shore. And the water would just ooze out, right? It was no big deal when there were no people there, right? When the 26 hurricane came up there, well, when they started putting farms around the lake, they said, we need a little muck dike because when it rains, the water comes out of the lake and it drowns our crops. So they said, okay, so they built a 6-foot-high dike made out of muck. And you can imagine what a great job that did. Drowned 600 people in Moore Haven. So then, the state got together and they said, we need to do something about this. We need to maybe build a big dike to protect the farmers from this gigantic lake. 2 years later, they were still arguing about it. Dade County said they were paying too much proportionately. Sound familiar? I mean, pretty regular. And then, while they were arguing about it, 2 years later, in 1928, somebody said, you know, we really should get going on this. We might get another hurricane. And somebody said, what are the odds of a hurricane hitting Lake Okeechobee twice in 2 years? Okay. God can't sink the Titanic. The automobile is only a novelty. This is true. I'm a Civil War buff. A guy actually said this. The Confederates couldn't hit an elephant at this. And don't worry, a hurricane wouldn't hit the same spot 2 years later. To which I say, if you ever go out to Belgrade, I've been at this statue 100 times. It was built in the 50s. These are the people that are running from the 1928 hurricane. And they are holding up their arms in a futile effort to protect themselves from a wall of water. Let's talk about the 28 hurricane. It started way out in the ocean. Didn't have CNN, didn't have satellites. The first time anybody knew it was out there is when a ship telegraphed to the U.S. Weather Service from out in the middle of nowhere. They got to the port in, I think, Barbados, and they sent a telegram to New York, or to Washington, and said, we ran into something, and they said that the wind freshened, which is their way of saying that it went from 10 miles an hour to 100 in about 5 minutes. It freshened. So somehow they survived. So that was the first they knew this hurricane was out there. It was definitely a Cape Verde storm. The hurricane scientists have done, an autopsy, and they can tell from the way it came over, the way it was, the mechanics, that it definitely started in Cape Verde. You know what I'm talking about? These are the storms that come off the coast of Africa. They're the monsters, so they have that whole ocean. And the irony is the greatest hurricane monsters start as dust storms in the Sahara Desert. Wrap your hands around that. So here comes this hurricane. I didn't want to do this.
Mind if I say something?
Yes, sir.
It's a quick thing. They didn't say much about the 26 hurricane hit this area. There was a barge with a little young circle. And my grandparents saw my father coming from a wood house to a concrete house because their house got blown away in the 26 hurricane.
Yeah, well, I'm going to tell
In
you.
Hollywood, this area very badly.
I'm going to give you a hint.
Barge in the middle of a young circle.
Give you a hint. 28 hurricane came down here too. So I'm going to tell you that.
Yeah.
Okay, so here comes the hurricane. And if you read up a lot of this stuff, for years people were like, oh, they got a bad forecast that the hurricane wasn't going to hit. Well, it's kind of true and kind of not true. So here's the Florida paper. It says it's going to hit North Florida. And here's the Miami Daily News, and it said it was going to, we'll get nothing more than gale force winds in Miami. Nassau is going to get the brunt of it. Okay. This is the Palm Beach Post of Saturday, September 15th. The storm hit the next day. So you'll hear about, oh, the Seminoles all fled because they saw the sawgrass was, growing. No. First of all, a lot of Seminoles were killed in the 28 hurricane, so. But this is the paper that landed on Saturday. It was the afternoon. The problem is, by then, it was getting a little late, wasn't it? And in fact, there was and we'll see here, today we'll tell if it hits the coast. And that's the magic word, May. So the hurricane forecasters of 1928, today's forecasters have computers and planes and drones and jets and all this stuff. You know what else they have that their 1928 counterparts didn't have? Humility. Because even as Andrew was coming ashore in Homestead, there was still a hurricane warning up from Vero to Key West. Because these things do funny things. Anybody remember Charlie?
Yep.
Charlie was supposed to hit Tampa Bay. It hit Port Charlotte. People said, how could it miss by 200 miles? It didn't hit by 200 miles. It missed by 200 miles. It missed by 10 miles. The 10-mile difference between staying offshore and continuing on to Tampa and taking a little jiggle and smashing Port Charlotte. So they do funny things.
That's
So-
something that's where's the center line in the cone.
What's that?
That's why they now got rid of the center line in the cone for that.
Yeah, forget the cone. Everybody misunderstands the cone because the cone, they look at the cone and they think that's where the hurricane's going to hit. And if you're outside the cone, then you're okay. The cone actually shows you the projections of where the eye might hit. So the eye could hit at the very edge of the cone, and if you're right next to it, guess what? So, the National Weather Service, for some reason, the hurricanes were being done out of Jacksonville, but of course the Miami, the office was a big deal. And the guy came out and said, recurve, it's going to recurve. You know what I mean by that? You see all these hurricanes and they're coming over and they make this big turn and they head up towards Iceland. And then we don't have to worry about it. That's what most hurricanes do. So this guy said, oh, we think it's going to recurve. So at like 5 o'clock Saturday night, they put out a notice, recurve not yet indicated. Yeah, that's very bad. Now, the 28 hurricane did eventually recurve. It recurved in Sebring. And so by then it did a lot of damage. So then people say, well, wait a minute. That's why there was so much damage, because people didn't get the most updated information. They got a flawed report or whatever. Well, let's think about that. First of all, was there CNN? Were there TVs?
No.
There were radios. How many people had a radio in 1928? And by the way, if you're a poor migrant farmer worker, you didn't have a radio. And let's say you decided, okay, I'm out in Belglade on the southeast coast of Lake Okeechobee. I'm going to flee this hurricane. Well, if any of you guys are familiar with that part of Florida, even today, there are only 3 ways out of southeast corner of Lake Okeechobee. Highway 27 out to Fort Myers, which was not being built yet. They were building the roadbed. You know that in Florida, you can't just lay a road. You have to first lay a roadbed 3 or 4 feet above, because otherwise it'll flood, if there's a sun shower. So they were building Highway 41, the road out to Fort Myers. They hadn't finished that. There was Highway 98, which hugs a 2-lane, which hugs the east shore of Lake Okeechobee, goes up to Okeechobee City. I was on it a month or 2 ago. It's still a slow ride. The third option was towards West Palm. Well, you're not going to go there, are you? That's where the hurricane's coming. And all of this presumes that in 1928 you had a car, which most people didn't. And especially out in the glades, where there were poor migrant workers who literally didn't have a roof over their head. At the end of the day, they slept under a tree. You think they had a car? No. So, here comes the hurricane. And this is what it did to my employer, the Palm Beach Post. I went in there. It was the first time in there. They'd only been in business for 12 years. First time they didn't put out an addition. So they had, building that time. The Jupiter Lighthouse. I don't know if you guys have ever been up there. It's gorgeous. It's the oldest structure in Palm Beach County. If any of you guys are Civil War buffs, it was designed by General Gordon Meade, who became the hero of Gettysburg. This thing is solid. The 1928 hurricane made it sway. Yeah, you don't want to be in there when it's doing this. And it squeezed the mortar from between the bricks like toothpaste. Yeah, so that was pretty scary. But, and the landfall was not Jupiter. By all the research I did indicated that the landfall probably was right at the Lake Worth West Palm Beach line, if you kind of know where that is, kind of central Palm Beach County. I was doing a talk in Boynton Beach when I was working on the book, and I said, the indications are that the eye was just around the Lake Worth area, it didn't go any further south than that. My lady raised her hand. She said, the eye was here too. And I looked at her and I knew that she wasn't bluffing. She had been in the Boynton Beach High School, 2 weeks old. They just finished building it, and she was in the school. And the top floor collapsed and killed the kid. So, and in fact, I later found out that the Delray Beach Fire Department, okay, take your geography here, had on their webpage, they have a first-person account of the eye, the calm, in Delray. Okay? And in Jupiter, the lady named Bessie Du Bois was a famous historian. She was 12 years old. She's gone now. She talked about how the bell that they used to bring in people for dinner had stopped ringing, and then all of a sudden it started ringing again, and she knew that they had passed through the eye, that the winds were coming from the other direction. So it was a monster storm on the coast. It knocked trains off the track here, broke windows from Miami to Vero, did tremendous damage on the coast of Palm Beach County, and then it headed inland. If you're familiar with Zora Neale Hurston, in a book called Their Eyes Were Watching God, the hurricane in that book is inspired by the 1928 hurricane. Now she takes a little liberty. She says the hurricane had 200-mile-an-hour winds. Not true. She also said it had like a 50-foot wall of water. Also not true. But it's a great book. It's one of my top 10 books in Florida by Florida authors ever. So I highly recommend you read it. Let's talk about why this hurricane did so much damage. I don't know how much a chance you guys get to go up to Lake Okeechobee. It is an amazing thing. It is 3/4 the size of Rhode Island. Okay? You can see it from space. There it is. Here's the problem with Lake Okeechobee. If you want to do this tonight, go home tonight and go to your kitchen, fill a frying pan to the brim with water, and try to walk across the kitchen floor without spilling it. Lake Okeechobee is only 20 feet deep at any point. And so anytime there's a storm event, the water sloshes. Okay? Big time. They had one a few years ago where the north end of the lake was 9 feet higher than the low end, the south end. That didn't matter for reasons you guys probably know, but I'm going to explain it to you. So, when storms hit this lake, very bad. So this guy came along. Your county is named for him. He became governor in 1900 with a plan to drain the Everglades. We're going to drain that worthless swamp and put in farms, and it's going to be the richest farm soil in the world, which it was, but soon it's not going to be because that muck tends to dry up and blow away. Pretty soon we're going to have 700,000 acres of limestone, a great parking lot for a Dolphins game, I don't know. But that's what he wanted to do, and he carved these huge canals, like the one, the New River Canal, Miami Canal, the ones that come from the lake, drain the Everglades. And all these farmers came in, not sugar. Sugar didn't come until the 40s. And they started growing stuff, and they said, like we talked before, every time it rains, our crops, so they built the dike. They built the dike, a 6-foot dike. And here comes the hurricane. Now look where it's coming. See where Lake Okeechobee is? Because the first question I had when I started researching this book is, how does a hurricane coming from the coast cause all the water to go out to the southeast? And then I figured it out. Well, it's the guys from the Hurricane Center that helped me. A hurricane is a giant cyclone. It's a giant tornado. And it goes counterclockwise. That's why the worst place you want to be is the front right quadrant. That's where you're going to get smashed. And not on the compass, on the position of the storm, which way it's coming. So that's the front right. You don't want to be there. So as it's coming ashore, it came right over the north shore of Lake Okeechobee. And this historian at the National Hurricane Center told me that had it been daytime, you would have seen fish flopping around on the lake bed at the north shore of Lake Okeechobee, near Okeechobee City. Because as the storm came over, the winds came down from the north, pushed all that water to the only spot in Lake Okeechobee that had a large population. right there. Belglade, South Bay, down there. And that's where he killed everybody. That was the extent of the flooding. Okay, look at that. They had some up here too, the way it come around, but look at that. That's a lot of mileage. That's a lot of acres. So, this is what it looked like. That's the University of Florida Agriculture Extension building out there. They're still out there, but they had standing water for weeks out there. And that's what it looked like. They couldn't get all the bodies. It took them weeks to find all the bodies. This guy was the governor, and his name was John Martin. You guys know Martin County up there, right, Stewart? The reason that was formed was because there were a bunch of businessmen in Stewart who were tired of being part of Palm Beach County. And they wanted the legislature to create their own county, and the legislature was kind of sitting on its hands. So they went to the governor and said, we'll make you a deal. If you help push this through, we'll name the county for you. So Governor Martin's sitting up there in Tallahassee, and he says, something going on down there in the Glades, down west of Palm Beach. And I don't know why, you didn't have CNN. We need to send some guys down there to see what's going on. So this is what they found. This is actually from a group of American Legion guys from Tampa who came to help and took pictures. This is just about the only one I can show you. It's pretty awful. So the problem was, let me back up. The problem was, it was the middle of September. And you guys have been here in the middle of September. It is not fall leaves yet. There was standing water with grass and plants and dead animals and dead people. And they were terrified of disease. So they said, we've got to get all these people buried, and we've got to do it fast. So they buried anywhere they could find high ground. There's urban legends that there are dozens of small graveyards all around the sugar growing area with like 5 bodies. They don't know because nobody marked it. They just buried and kept going. So a lot of people, they brought them on, put them on those trucks, and they brought them to the coast, brought them to West Palm Beach. And there's a cemetery in the city of West Palm Beach called Woodlawn. And they built a mass grave in the back of the cemetery. They put 62 people in it. 62 white people. And the white people were put in after their families had been able to identify them. They were given little toe things so they knew who they were. They had a nice ceremony with a marching band and everything else. There were 674 black victims who did not get that. They were dumped in a mass grave in the black neighborhood of West Palm Beach in a pauper cemetery. They dug a big hole and they dumped them in. That's not even the crime. The crime is that for the next 60 years, that grave was unmarked. At one point, they moved a street so that part of it was over the grave. And it was only at the 75th anniversary that some activists, some African-American activists, because nobody else was doing it, came forward and said, this is a crime. You know, I've been to Gettysburg, and you can't go 10 feet without some marker where some guy twisted his ankle. And here's 674 people buried in a big hole. And not just that, 674 victims of the greatest natural disaster that you never heard of. So finally, they got a sign and they got a fence. So it's finally, you know, getting some recognition. And the Boy Scouts go out every year and clean it up, and they always have an event on the anniversary. So finally, there's some recognition of this. So let's move ahead a few years. What did we learn from the 1928 hurricane? Well, Henry Flagler had built the great railroad to the Keys. And it opened for business in 1912. There he is. He was dead 3 months later. And when he was building the railroad, they said it was Flagler's folly. But when he finished, they said it was one of the greatest miracles in the world. How long did it last? Labor Day hurricane. Who's heard of that one? 1935 Labor Day. Yeah. At the time, it had the lowest barometric pressure. That's kind of how they rank hurricanes, of any hurricane that they'd ever recorded. This is what it did to Mr. Flagler's railroad. It also killed about 600 guys down in the Keys who were World War I veterans who'd been complaining that they never got their bonus. So when Franklin Roosevelt was elected, he put them to work under the WPA, building the motor road in the Keys. And when the hurricane hit, it was Labor Day. They tried to get a rescue train, but it was a holiday. They couldn't get a supervisor. And they finally got the train down there, and the guys got on it, and a wave came along and washed them all off. So, people who think that God spreads out hurricane to cut us a break, but we already know from the past few years that that's not the case. 3 of the 4 most profound hurricanes to strike Florida in the 20th century happened 9 years apart. The 26, the 28, the 35. And really about 200 miles apart, which in meteorological terms is nothing. Fourth one, of course, being Andrew. So it was not a great time if you were in Florida. But we're not done. 1947, this hurricane came up and struck, came up through the middle of the state and struck Lake Okeechobee. Did a tremendous amount of flooding, and that's when they said that they needed an organization to control, to manage flood control. And they called it the Florida Everglades Drainage District. It's now the South Florida Water Management District, one of the most powerful agencies in Florida. The flooding did not happen in Lake Okeechobee. Why? Because after the 28 hurricane, they decided finally to build a dike. And you guys have probably seen it. It's not really a dike, it's more like a giant berm. You can't see the lake. It took them 40 years to build it. But when this hurricane came in 1947, they built enough of it, no damage. So, we had a lot of hurricanes in the 40s. We had 7 majors in 6 years. Look at that. Then, between 1951 and 1996, we had hardly any. But here's the deal. When did everyone move to Florida? So it's kind of a coincidence that at the time when people were thinking of moving to Florida, there were no hurricanes. So everybody said, yeah, let's go to Florida. Then Hurricane David came along. Who remembers that? 1979, yeah. We thought it was going to be really bad. It kind of did a near miss, and then it smashed into Savannah and did a lot of damage. But it scared the heck out of everybody because it was the first hurricane to threaten South Florida like in 15 years. And it didn't happen, so it was good. And then we got to Andrew. That's still scary, isn't it?
Yeah.
After Andrew, I interviewed that guy, Dr. Gray, in Colorado. 1997, 5 years later. And he said, you know what, Andrew's just the beginning because Florida is sticking out there and it shouldn't be getting hit all the time. And it's just a sitting duck. And 7 years later, here's what we had. Now, these were not, you guys didn't really get a lot of this. You got some of it. Francis and Jean, the landfall for those 2 storms was exactly 2 weeks apart, same time of day, and pretty much in the same spot in Martin County. So that's really scary. And then Ivan hit up here, it was really more of an Alabama storm with it counts. And then Charlie. This was like in like 2 months. So we had a wild season, right? And there's Max Mayfield. He invited me to go up and tour the Jean damage up in the Treasure Coast, and they couldn't figure out what was Francis damage and what was Jean damage. Because they'd happened 2 weeks apart. No matter where you are in Florida, you're never more than 60 miles from the ocean. That's why you can't get homeowners insurance. You think I'm kidding? People who buy homes in Ocala, or Gainesville, or Orlando, or Lake City, and they say, oh, I'm good here, I'm not going to get a hurricane. Yeah, they do.
Why did they mention Hurricane Cleo in '63?
Why did who mention it?
I didn't hear it mentioned at all. Cleo, '63.
Well, I know about Cleo.
Right up State Road 7.
Yes.
There's a lot of
Well, let me focus on this for a second. So I want to talk about Hurricane Jean. And the thing about Hurricane Jean that there's a mechanics thing. Everybody thinks that a hurricane is like a bomb and the damage radiates out evenly, but that's not the case. So Hurricane Jean actually hit the landfall was in Martin County. It was Port Saluda near Stewart. But see where Vero Beach is? Here's the eye wall. They almost got nothing. The landfall spot often gets nothing. This is where the top eye wall, that's where they're getting clobbered. And Vero Beach got smashed. Here's what it looked like. Now, it's not a hard and fast rule because Stewart, which was kind of the landfall, they got smashed too. But a lot of times, if you're north of the eye, you're like, oh, I'm okay. No, you may get the worst of it. Storm surge. You guys know a little bit about something here. Hypothetical direction by Category 5, Hollywood would get 9 to 12 feet of water. Potential standing water, Hollywood Lakes 3 feet, the Nature Center 6 feet, Rotary Park, you guys know where these places are? Only less than 3 feet. Andrew was 17 feet. 17-foot storm surge. So you got a bit of a break. Well, Palm Beach has the best deal because the storm surge is mostly about how quickly the water drops. And in Palm Beach, you go out less than a mile and it drops to like 100 feet. You start getting south, not so much here in Ohio. By the time you get to Miami, the joke is you could walk from Miami to Nassau because the water's such a problem. And that's why they had tremendous storm surge down in Miami. We had the boat up. Remember this one? Remember that picture of the boat up on the land? For freight. So, as I mentioned earlier, an earthquake gives you 3 seconds. A tornado gives you 3 minutes. Hurricane gives you 3 days. The hurricane gives you 3 days. So what's your excuse for not preparing? Not only does it give you 3 days, but guess what? Is there an earthquake season? No. No. But there is a hurricane season. So when it's the end of April, you still can order your storm shutters. You still can go out and get your wood panels. You still can go ahead and get your batteries and your water and have a plan for what you're going to do if a hurricane hits. You know when's a bad time to do it? When the hurricane's 24 hours away. But you know what? During Francis, I went out to Home Depot in West Palm Beach. It was 5 in the morning. People were out there with, clipboards and measuring tapes, buying wood, right? And we used to put out this hurricane guide every year on Memorial Day. You know what people did with it? Threw it in the trash. So, here's the rules. Number 1, prepare early. And have a plan. Have a plan. Come on, man. This is what we get. We get hurricanes. Don't evacuate if you don't have to. This is a biggie. My house has hurricane windows. It's got these storm fabric things that are motorized so an old man like me doesn't have to put them up. And you know where's the only place in the world I want to be during a hurricane? In my house. Now, my 90-year-old mother went through Andrew. There's no way on earth she's going to stay in her home during a, well, she's in an assisted living place. She's okay. But she would never live through a hurricane again. And she said, I won't do it. I'll go somewhere. But you say you want to leave, okay? If you want to leave, there's something you have to understand. When they order mandatory evacuations, they do it by water, not by wind, except mobile homes. So usually along the coast, there's all these places with mandatory evacuations. A lot of you here probably are not in a mandatory evacuation zone. And if you are, why do you want to go to Macon? Do you have a friend out in Weston? Go out to Weston. You had a friend up in Boca, or where they're not? Go up there. Don't go to Macon, because here's the deal. You're going to be driving up to Macon, and you get around Wildwood, and the hurricane's like around Cuba, so they don't know if it's going to hit the West Coast or the East Coast. And all the people from Fort Myers and Tampa are all meeting you in Wildwood. So you're going to be sitting on the interstate when the hurricane hits your car. I'd rather be in my house. And let's say you make it to Macon, and you're sitting in the Red Roof Inn along I-75, and you're watching CNN, and there's your house, and there goes your roof. And okay, the hurricane's gone now, but now comes the cleanup. And what's the first thing you want to do? You want to get home. How long is it going to take you to get home from Macon with everybody else? Yeah. So, if you want to leave, if you feel comfortable, listen, if it's a Category 5, all bets are off. But if you feel comfortable staying in your home, stay in it. And then as soon as the winds pass, you can start cleaning up immediately. If you're not comfortable staying in your home, or if you're in a mandatory evacuation zone, stay with a friend. You can go to a shelter. They're not very comfortable, but thank goodness they're there. But really avoid them if you can. Even the people that do the shelters, they say, look, we're not making these the Hilton. These are for desperate, people that have nowhere else to go. So go with a friend, or stay in your home. And if you have to evacuate close by. Number 4, go nearby. Number 5, if the hurricane hits you, from whatever religion you are, say thank you. And then write a check to the Red Cross or whoever for the people that it did get hit. When my kids were very little, every time a hurricane was threatening, I would tell them this story. It's from the Jewish tradition, but I'm sure it's in every tradition. A man's out in his field working his farm, and he looks back, and there's a big plume of smoke coming from the village. And he says, oh God, please let it not be my house. And he runs into the village, and it's his neighbor's house. And he says, God, please forgive me for wishing that fire on my neighbor. So, when a hurricane's coming, don't wish it on somebody else. Wish it to go to the ocean and dissipate. And if it does hit somebody, I have family in North Carolina. You know, I have a very good friend in St. Pete who lost everything. So I always write a check to the Red Cross every time one of these hurricanes hits. If you don't like the Red Cross, give it to somebody else. But do it, because next time it's going to hit Hollywood and you're going to see trucks pulling up with people from Nebraska. You think I'm kidding? And you're going to see cops from the Panhandle, where some sheriff said, send 3 cars down to help the Broward County Sheriff's Office. Because that's what you do. So please consider doing that. So, write these down. If you don't know whether you're in an evacuation zone, go home and look it up right now. Okay? Florida Emergency Management, they're the guys who do it for the whole state. When you see the governor, whoever the governor is, you know, when the governors are doing political stuff, you might not like them, you might love them. When there's a hurricane coming, politics goes away. And all that governor and all those people are trying to do is save lives. So when they do these press conferences, please listen to them. And go on the emergency management webpage and find out where you are at a hurricane. So thank you for listening. Please support the hurricane people. That's a scan. You can do a survey whether you like to talk. I do have a few minutes for questions or comments. Somebody in the back.
Yes, great presentation. But I can't. They can go first. They can go first.
Oh, somebody up front? Yeah, go ahead.
Started giving names to her.
I do know when they started giving names. The 1928 hurricane did not have a name. 26 did not have a name. The 35, they call it Labor Day because it hit on Labor Day. The hurricane of 1950, which they thought was the dike was just getting built. They thought it was going to wash out the dike. The dike held. They called King, but because by then they had started giving hurricanes, they were using the military alphabet. That was K. And then in the mid-50s, they started giving hurricanes names because they thought people could understand it better if it was like a thing. You know, it wasn't some abstract thing. It was like a character. They could better understand that it was a, dangerous thing. Originally, they named it for women, and then everybody was like, you know what, come on. So they finally started naming it for men in 1979. First one was David, which almost, hit us. And what they do is it's very interesting. When you look at the names, you alternate between English, Spanish, and French. Because where the hurricanes hit, those are the languages that are spoken. And that's how you have names like Henri or Pablo and stuff like that. And they alternate. Then, of course, they retire hurricanes if they do something bad. But there was this lady, and then I'll get to you. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so great presentation. I came in late. Could you talk about why, because it's in the middle, why the hurricane was so bad? Because I would think a hurricane of that magnitude would be close to the coast. So being that Lake Okeechobee in the middle, it's confusing.
Why did the hurricane do so much damage all the way inland at Lake Okeechobee?
Yeah.
Well, I mentioned that, as it came in, because of the way it was spinning, the winds came from the north and pushed all the water out.
Okay.
So the official death toll at the time was 1,836. In 2003, for the 75th anniversary, the National Hurricane Center changed it to 2,500, not as a result of any new research, but just an acknowledgement that 1,800 number was wrong. It's probably closer to 3,000. But that's where it killed everybody. And people say, well, didn't it lose juice going from the coast to Lake Okeechobee? Well, that's only 40 miles. Look what that hurricane did in North Carolina. They don't run out of gas that quickly. You, sir, and then you. Go ahead, sir.
All the great writing that you did, editorial-wise, how come you never addressed the building code and the elevation of all these new developments and the construction code that finally is being upgraded after many, many years?
Well, in my book on the 28 hurricane, I do talk about Andrew, and I do talk about how the codes were changed after Andrew. There was a guy named Lewis. He was a state senator from Riviera Beach, and he was kind of the dean. He was, I'd be in his 70s. And after Andrew, he chaired a committee to look at all the ways we had gotten cocky. Andrew was the first major hurricane in decades. And during that time, everybody was building, everybody was looking the other way. The Miami Herald got video of county inspectors doing windshield inspections. You know what that is? You're driving by and, yeah, okay, passed. I personally saw a building down in South Dade County where they had put the wall on and the whole, it was a modular thing, the whole wall came off. And you could see, there was the 2x4 where it was supposed to be attached to the plank. And it was like 2 out of every 5 or 6 nails actually were in the plank. So they had guys up there with walk bands, this is 1992. And they got the gun and they were just going. So this Lewis Commission made 103 recommendations to the state legislature, and they approved 97 of them. Type them that now. Because they understood this was a serious thing. So the codes changed dramatically after Andrew. Now you're paying more for it, you know, because you have to pay more to bulk up your house, but it's worth it. The 1928 hurricane, they had not yet started bolting houses to the slabs. They just figured gravity would do it.
Wow.
And there were homes, they found homes in Lantana where the house had slid 8 inches on the slab. And anybody here who's in the construction business, when a house slides 8 inches on the slab, you got to throw away the house. Yes, ma'am. I don't know how much time we have, so let me.
How come when they had Hurricane Andrew, it didn't hit the coast lines, it went right into Homestead and devoured Homestead
Well,
like a war?
Well, I'll tell you a story. I had a 6-month-old and a 3-year-old, and my editor wanted to send me to Vero Beach, and I said, because we were going everywhere, and I said, Tom, I've never asked you this, and I'll never ask you again, which I didn't. Please, I got a wife and kids, and it looks like this thing. Originally, they said I was going to hit Boca. On Sunday afternoon, they were saying Boca. That's how unpredictable these things are. And he said, okay, I'll make you a deal this one time. Stay with your family. As soon as the sun comes up, get going. And I got up and he had me go to the beach at Palmetto Park Road in Boca, start getting south. And I got as far as Hollywood. And there's an IHOP somewhere. And the guy was actually serving breakfast. It was all he had. He had a generator and he was just serving breakfast. And I met the reporters who had been in Miami. And they were like, oh man, you have no idea. But Andrew was a very tight storm. It had a very tight eye and had a very tight wind field. And so it was really almost like a buzzsaw. Charlie, there's an outfit in Clemson that drives around in hurricanes and tornadoes and measures the wind. They're in a big truck and they bolt it to the ground. They were at the Fort Myers Airport. Okay, Charlie knocked down buildings in Port Charlotte. And 10 miles away at the Fort Myers Airport, highest wind was 30 miles an hour. Because they're tight. So that was,
And then the one hit Punta Gorda.
yes, that was Charlie. Smashed Punta Gorda. Okay, sir, you had a question, and then I'll
Yes.
get to the lady in the back.
Yes, the word hurricane, the name comes from a god in Peru, was it?
You read my book.
No, I haven't.
It's actually from the one of the original indigenous peoples of the islands. I think it was the ones in Puerto Rico, the Tainos. I'm mispronouncing it. Yeah, I think they're the ones that came up with the hurricane. It was a god. There was the Sun Sentinel. I'll give him credit for this. They sent a crew to Africa, and on the coast in Senegal, they had a priest, a high priest, cut up like animal parts and throw them in the ocean to beg the gods not to send hurricanes to America. That's pretty nice of them, right? This lady here, and then I got some more over here. Yes, ma'am.
My family came to Key West in 1875, and we have family reunions, and none of the things that we talk about were ever about hurricanes. So I'm curious to know how far back.
Why doesn't Key West get hurricanes? Okay, I'm going to tell you why. For the same reason Barbados doesn't get a lot of hurricanes. Look at a big map of the hurricane zone. How big is Key West? Now the problem is, if it does get hit, it's very bad. So there was a hurricane called Rita. This is like, I think 2008 or something. And it was down there, and it looked like it was going to maybe hit Key West. So they sent me to Key West, and they said, oh, you got to go to the grotto. You know about the grotto? At the Star Cathedral in Key West, they have a grotto to the Virgin Mary that was built by a nun who had prayed for the hurricane to miss Key West. And when it did, she built the Virgin Mary grotto. And every time a hurricane is threatening, everybody goes to the grotto and prays. And Key West usually gets missed. And so my editor called me and he said, well, what's the deal? I said, people are already, the storm passed. People are already back out in the bars. Looks like not less Rita, more Margarita. How am I doing on time? How am I doing on time?
222.
Just a few more minutes, a few more questions? Okay, a few more questions and comments. Yes, sir.
One, I think two real good resources for hurricanes before and after hurricane. One, both Hollywood and Broward County's websites and social media as far as instructions with hurricanes and what they're predicting too, when did the hurricane coming, and also right after a hurricane, what the plans are for cleanup.
Well, let me say this about hurricanes. I know how much you're going to tell you. If a hurricane is coming anywhere near you, act as if it's going to hit you.
Yeah.
You know, like I said, we thought Andrew was going to hit Boca. It smashed my brother's house in the Redwoods. If you guys know where that is. And frankly, Wilma did most of its damage like in West Palm and North, but it knocked down all my fences in Boca. Because forget that little red dot, forget the cone. I was talking to one emergency manager, this guy used to be the state emergency manager. I said, Philip, it seems like nowadays they don't want to know is it going to hit Florida or Georgia. They want to know is it going to hit Hollywood Boulevard or Sterling. People have gotten so cocky because of the terrific science. Presume it's going to hit you. Okay, a couple more questions or comments. Did anybody leave out? Yes, ma'am?
From Irma to go up to the villages. Instead of here, from Kentucky, we had the eye right there.
Yeah, to hit the villages. Okay, thank you so much.